guys, it's Eshani, aka Total Makeup Junkie 101. So today I have a little bit of a follow-up video from my Viseart eyeshadow palette review and swatch video that I uploaded last week. In case you guys haven't seen my Viseart eyeshadow palette review video, I will go ahead and link it up here in a card, and I will also link it in the description box down below for you guys. But towards the end of that video, I asked you if you were curious about the Viseart face palettes, or like their blush palettes that I picked up at Eyesmatte, and lots of you guys said that you were. So in today's video, I'm going to be discussing the 3 blush palettes that Viseart offers, as well as the 1 sculpting or like contour highlight palette that they offer. All 4 of these palettes were released at the same time. They came out not that long ago. I would say within the past year, like sometime in 2016, these launched. I ended up picking up the 3 blush palettes during Eyesmatte. If you guys saw my Eyesmatte haul video with my best friends, you saw that I picked these up. And after I had played with those for a while, I decided to go ahead and purchase the sculpting palette as well, which I didn't pick up at Eyesmatte, but I did pick it up online afterwards. So today's video, as always, will be a super informative video. I will talk about the price, packaging, product, price per gram breakdown. I'll tell you about the texture, the longevity. I will show you guys full palette swatches of all 4 of the palettes I'm going to talk about. So it is going to be a very, very in-depth video. So let's go ahead and start off by discussing the packaging of these. They come in the exact same outer casing packaging as the eyeshadow palettes. I'll just go ahead and show you guys. It's the exact same size, same material, same everything. It's so similar that these 2 actually have the exact same amount of product in them as well, which is pretty cool because the eyeshadow palettes do have 12 smaller pans, whereas these face palettes do have 6 larger pans, and each of these pans is exactly double the size of one of the eyeshadow pans. I think it's really nice that Viseart did that because these face palettes are the exact same price as the eyeshadow palettes, so it's nice to know that you're getting the exact same amount of product and you're not, you know, getting ripped off or anything. In terms of the actual layout, like I said, you're getting 6 longer rectangular pans. They're really nicely laid out. The one thing I will say that I'm not super crazy about with this layout is that the pans are so skinny and like thin that if you go into it with a fluffier brush or like a fluffy blush brush or something, you will tend to kind of touch the pans around it. That is a little bit annoying, especially when you start diving into these blushes, because the blushes have such a wide like array of shades that if I really just wanted this light color and then my brush started going into this kind of medium darker shade, it can kind of mess with the color you wanted. Not a huge deal. Of course, you can just use a smaller brush. It's not that big of a problem, but it's just something I wanted to point out. So I'm gonna go ahead and just start off by talking about the highlight contour palette first, because this one is a little bit different, at least in terms of the textures compared to the blush palettes. So this is what this palette looks like. It is called the Highlight and Sculpt palette. Obviously, the 3 shades over here are your highlighters, and these 3 shades over here are your sculpt. All 3 of the highlighter shades do have a metallic shimmer to them. This is not a fine shimmer or anything. They are quite frosty, whereas all of the sculpting shades are completely matte, or maybe like a slight satin, but not really noticeable. They are for the most part very matte. So here are swatches of the entire highlight and sculpt palette. Of course, the first 3 shades are the highlighter shades. The last 3 shades are your sculpting or your contour shades. You can see that you are getting quite a large range of contour colors. You get a very, very light tan all the way up to a really deep purpley brown. I will say that the reason I didn't pick this palette up initially and I just went for the blush palettes is because I knew that these colors over here were not going to work as contours on my skin. After testing them, I know that to be a fact, because the only color that I feel like would really work as a contour would be the darkest shade, but this dark shade is so purple toned that on my very, very warm complexion, it almost looks like I have a bruise on my face. I know that a lot of what you hear on YouTube is that you should use a gray or ashy toned color to contour because you're trying to make it look like a shadow, which is naturally, you know, gray toned. But the problem with that on a complexion like mine, which is very, very yellow, almost orange toned, is that when you start putting gray on top of it, it really starts to look purple and it starts to look like you have a bruise, which is definitely not the look we're going for when we're contouring. So I do tend to go for more neutral toned powders or even sometimes warm toned powders because on my skin, they just look more natural. So unfortunately, while these contours don't work on my skin as a face contour, I have been using them as eyeshadows and they work beautifully as eyeshadows. In terms of the highlights, I love all three of these highlighters. All three of them look really pretty on my skin. I actually have this middle shade on my face today, and I also have that shade on my inner corner of my eyes. In terms of the texture of these powders, I will say that the shimmery 3 highlighters are not super dense, but they are very, very metallic. It doesn't take a lot to deliver a lot of pigment on the skin. They do have a little bit of a thinner texture, which I do feel like makes them very easy to blend and build. Let's just say they're not as like creamy and dense as something like the Becca Shimmering Skin Perfectors, for example. They're a little bit more thin, but they still give a really, really prominent glowy highlight. In terms of these matte powders over here, they are very similar to these matte blushes. So the texture of them is quite thin as well. I do think that thin texture allows them to build and blend, like I was saying, very, very effortlessly. But if you were trying to go into it as a concentrated swatch, like if you were just going into it with your fingers and trying to swatch it on your skin, you might find that it is very like dusty. It kind of like dusts away and it doesn't really like build to be super, super opaque. I personally don't mind that because these are going on your cheeks. Generally, you don't necessarily need a super, super pigmented stripe of brown contour on your face. You want to be able to blend that out effortlessly, and the thinness of these powders really does allow for blendability. But don't get me wrong, they are very, very pigmented. So you still want to be careful with them. You still want to go into them with a little bit of a fluffier brush and really kind of, you know, tap off your brush and blend them lightly on your skin. Don't get too carried away because these are still really pigmented. Okay, now let's go ahead and discuss the 3 blush palettes. So let's go ahead and discuss the #1 Plum Bronze one first. Here's a look at the colors you're getting in the Plum Bronze palette. So as you would expect, you get kind of like a row of plummy shades and then a row of kind of bronzy shades over here. This is definitely going to be your most neutral blush palette out of the 3 that are offered. If you're more into everyday, very wearable blushes, this is probably the one you want to go for. So here are swatches of all 6 of the shades in the Plum Bronze palette. You can see the first 3 shades are the plum side, the last 3 shades are the bronze side. I think this is a really, really gorgeous palette. I think every single shade next to the other one is quite different to justify having all 6 of them in the palette. Personally, my favorite color in this entire palette has to be this dark burgundy right here. I've actually used this as an eyeshadow as well, and it works so beautifully. Like I said, it is a little bit thinner, but it builds up beautifully. It blends effortlessly. Now, I do want to say, although I did pick up all of these palettes to use both on my eyes and my face, I don't know if they've actually been tested around the eye area. So it's kind of like a use at your own risk, use very cautiously. If you have sensitive eyes, beware. I personally haven't experienced any issues using these on my eyes, but I just wanted to let you guys know. So this is one of my favorite shades to use, not just as a blush, but also as an eyeshadow. It is very, very pigmented though. So if you have light skin, go into this with a stippling brush if you want to use it as a blush because it's pretty crazy. In terms of the actual textures, all 3 of these shades are matte. All 3 of these shades are fairly like satin finish. None of them have any prominent chunks of glitter, but I will say the most shimmery one is definitely the one down here. But once you get it onto the skin, once again, it's not like super, super glowy or anything. It just has a little bit of like you know, a sheen to it. Moving into discussing the number 2 Rose Coral palette. This one I will say could possibly be my favorite palette out of the 3 blushes. Showing you guys the palette up close, you can obviously see this is the rose side, this is the coral side. I really like this palette because you are getting some really vibrant, very bright pops of color, and you're getting a nice mix of like cool fuchsia tones as well as warm coral tones. So here are swatches of all 6 of the shades in the Rose Coral Blush palette. The first 3 are the rose part, the last 3 are the coral part of the palette. I really like this palette overall. I think all of the shades do perform really beautifully. Like I said, when you're trying to get a concentrated swatch, it's not the easiest, but once you go into this with a blush brush and put it on your skin, it looks gorgeous. This is definitely going to be the palette that, in my opinion, is geared more towards medium to tan complexions, because I do feel like a lot of these shades are quite bright if you have a lighter skin tone. Not that you can't pull it off. I mean, like I said, stippling brush, tap that off, blend it really lightly. You can still get these all to work, but because these shades are just so like vibrant and in your face, especially these 4 down here, I mean, darker skin tones, you're gonna go crazy for this palette. And just to let you guys know, all 6 of these shades are completely matte as well. And I have used these corally colors on my eyes as eyeshadow as well, and it's just so pretty. Okay, and then the final palette I wanna talk about is the number 3. This is the Orange Violet palette. Showing you guys that up close, of course, here's the orange row, here is the violet row. Again, I really love this palette. Maybe even a little bit more than the Rose Coral palette, because you are still getting your warm tones as well as your cool tones, but you're getting it in still vibrant, still dark, rich colors that are a little bit more muted and subdued. Like these are almost neon, and these are a little bit more like just wearable. So here are swatches of all 6 of the shades in the Orange Violet palette. Of course, the first 3 shades are the orange side of the palette. The last 3 shades are the violet side. Once again, absolutely love this palette. Every single shade performs really beautifully on the skin. Once again, all 6 of these shades are completely matte or maybe like slightly satin, but like I said, once you get them on the face, no shimmer, no glitter, nothing crazy. I love that these are just so vibrant, opaque, and pigmented. My personal favorite shade in this palette is this color right here on the orange side. It's kind of like a rusty, muted, almost like a, I don't know, like a henna color. If you guys have seen the color of like dried henna that they do, you know, at Indian weddings and stuff, that's kind of what it reminds me of, and it's gorgeous. So there we have swatches of all 4 of the Viseart face palettes. In terms of the ones that I personally highly recommend, I do think I prefer the Orange Violet palette out of all of the blush palettes. This is going to be a tan or darker skin girl's dream blush palette. Of course, if you're medium to lighter skin, I definitely think the Plum Bronze is gorgeous. I mean, it really just kind of depends on what you're looking for. I can see a use for all 4 of these, especially if you're a makeup artist. I mean, if you had these 4 in your stash, in your like, you know, makeup bag, I feel like you pretty much have every color you need. Wrapping up this review video, let's go ahead and do the price breakdown. Each of these palettes retails for $80. You can pick it up on the Muse Beauty Pro website. You can pick them up on Beautylish, Sephora.com. I will go ahead and link pretty much everywhere where you can get these in the description box below for you. I know $80 seems like an absolute insane amount of money, and to be perfectly honest, it is a little crazy, but when you actually see the price breakdown, you are getting 6 different shades. Each of these pans holds 4 grams each, which means you're getting 24 grams in this palette total. Like I said, that's the exact same amount you get in these eyeshadow palettes as well. So that means you are paying $3.33 per gram for these blush palettes. I said it in my Viseart eyeshadow palette video, and I will go ahead and say it again. $3.33 per gram, I think, is fairly reasonable. It is more on the higher end side, but it's definitely not a luxury price by any means. Also, these Viseart palettes are made in smaller batches in France, so they're not mass manufactured in Asia or anything like that. And overall, I really do love them. Now, do I prefer the blush palettes over the eyeshadow palettes? If I were to tell you to invest your money in one Viseart palette, face, or eyeshadow, I would definitely say go for their eyeshadow palettes first. Those are my personal favorite. I think it is really difficult to find a good matte eyeshadow formula. And when I say that Viseart hits the nail on the head with their matte shadows, I am not kidding. I'm not trying to lie to you. These are so good. Not to take away from the value of their blush palettes, because these are still really excellent, fabulous quality. I really love them a lot. But if you're going to invest 80 bucks in one Viseart palette, I would say check out my Viseart eyeshadow palette review video. Once again, it's linked down below. I think that video is just so informative. I swatched all of the Viseart palettes that I own. So yeah, that is pretty much everything. I hope you guys found this follow-up Viseart blush palette video helpful. Please don't forget to thumbs up this video and share it with your friends and family. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button down below if you guys want to be notified every time I upload a video, which is every Monday and Thursday. Again, thank you guys so much for watching and for supporting me and my channel. I really appreciate it, and I will talk to you guys in my next video on Monday. I will see you then. Bye!